Hey guys, it's Jay. Welcome back to my channel, where we discuss the popular culture of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In 1978, the animated adaptation of The Lord of the Rings hit the big screen. It was directed by Ralf Bakshi, and unfortunately today, a lot of people tend to dismiss this film, as the new Peter Jackson version seems to be taking everyone's imaginations by storm. But did Peter Jackson actually get any inspiration from the original 1978 film? Let's take a look at that. I remember taking a look at The Lord of the Rings, which was directed by Ralf Bakshi, way back in the early 1980s. It was a film which I really wasn't so keen on. I wasn't exactly a Lord of the Rings fan. I'd watched The Hobbit earlier on, but this particular film sort of caught me off guard. It was almost entirely rotoscoped, and by that, I mean that generously. If we take a look at the actual film, a lot of it was done pretty much with onstage actors. And in certain cases, depending on the way the film was shot, it seems as if all they did was to darken the exposure and sort of color over certain aspects of actors, leaving the original performances as they were. In a Disney film, rotoscoping is used as a tool to try and help to capture a more realistic tone for certain characters. You can see this a lot in the earlier films of the 1990s, like The Little Mermaid. Ralf Bakshi's films tend to use rotoscoping more as the entire film. You can see it in his works of Fire and Ice and The Lord of the Rings. I'm certain I don't have to go through the story, as pretty much every child out there has had some experience with J.R.R. Tolkien's masterpiece. And if you haven't, Peter Jackson's version has pretty much permeated the popular culture of today's media. Let's look instead on the impact that the 1978 version had on the audience at the time. Myself, in the 1980s, I remember watching this film, and I had mixed emotions about it. It really wasn't an animation, but it was. The characters were somewhat compelling, but at the same time, the pacing of the film also dragged on quite considerably. So it wasn't as exciting a film as I would have enjoyed. One thing that seems to stand out to me is that the actors, the physical actors I mean, who were performing these rotoscoped animations were actually more akin to a theatrical performance than being something on a piece of film. The way they actually interacted with each other was very much like acting on stage. You can see the actors looking at each other, playing up to each other's emotions. And in the case of Gandalf, it's completely animated. Gandalf himself flails his arms all over the place, using his little finger to point and direct and really show the different sightlines that people need to recognize. And this is something that's very dramatic. And it's something that you don't really see on film. With this particular style, I think Ralf Bakshi was trying to use a theatrical performance to actually fill in the gaps of where animation usually falls through. As far as animation goes, the character designs, for example, were uninspired. As far as I could tell, they literally were taking more or less the actors' faces and just drawing over them. The expressions, in some cases, were rather weird. If we take a look at Legolas's face, for example, when he tells Frodo and the rest to run away from the ring race, it's perplexing the kind of emotion he's gathering. Almost as if he's a deer caught in the headlights.
Fly, fly, the enemy is upon us.
As much success as the Peter Jackson films have had, I want to take a quick look and compare just slightly the two films and see some of the similarities that they both have. Usually, in rewrites and scripts which were created for television and movies, if a character isn't going to make it into the film, they usually just cut out completely. With The Lord of the Rings, certain lines appeared to be necessary, and giving them to other characters seemed a quick way for Ralf Bakshi to actually continue the narrative of the story and move it along as quickly as possible without having to introduce multiple characters in a story which was already as convoluted as possible. Is it coincidence that Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyles just happened to do the exact same thing in their movie? where they gave lines from certain characters to other characters just to continue to move the story along? A little of a coincidence, don't you think?
Who is she?
Now, I could be like every other reviewer out there and go on forever about the different failings of the Ralf Bakshi film. The rotoscoped animation, the visible actors who are not even animated for the most part, and just have their characters' silhouettes appearing on screen. Psychedelic nature of the film itself, the fact that a lot of the colors are oversaturated, backgrounds flip periodically and quite jarringly in certain scenes. But I choose rather to actually celebrate some of the successes of the film. A lot of the backgrounds were wonderfully drawn and illustrated. Some of the vistas that actually appear in the film are inspirational and might have actually inspired or at least been referenced by some of the production designers in the Peter Jackson version. Who knows? There are some really, really wonderful moments in the film. Boromir's death, for example, is quite moving. I remember when I first watched that, I really was struck with the heroism of a man who is fighting to save his friends. After just coming back from being as insidious and as betrayal as humanly possible, he finally finds his own humanity once again and tries to save the hobbits, who are pretty much helpless against the horde of orcs.
Aragorn, go to Minas Tirith. Save my people. Aragorn.
I will go. I promise you.
Gandalf as well, as animated as he is, and as flamboyant as he appears on screen, has some genuinely wonderful moments. He stands his ground against the Balrog, and we'll get to that in a moment, and really does narrate quite well in his final scene with the Great Beast.
Long I fell, and he fell with me. His fire was about me. Ever he clutched me, and ever I viewed him far under the living earth. There we fought above the mists of the world. I threw down my enemy, and his fall broke the mountainside. Then darkness took me.
But most of the main scenes were those done by the great, late John Hurt. His portrayal of Aragorn is wonderful. Although we don't see John Hurt's face at all, his voice and his commanding aspect of this role shines through, and we can really see that there is a passion about the man. He loves his job, and just how wonderful an actor he truly is.
I wouldn't take up with a ranger out of the wild.
They have no choice. There is no one else for them to take up with except a fat innkeeper who only remembers his name because people shouted at him all day.
Okay, I cannot mention the 1978 version of The Lord of the Rings without at least talking about the infamous Balrog scene. Truthfully, this is the one part, the one truly low, probably the lowest point of the film. It's supposed to be the most climactic point, the most action-ridden point, the most exciting section of the film. And unfortunately, it just falls flat on its face. It really is one of those things where the execution could have been done 100% better.
Balrog.
We look at The Hobbit and the massive impact that Smaug had on the film. His immense nature, the size of him, the grand scope. It really was shocking when we finally saw Smaug. And in this, unfortunately, we see the Balrog, and it literally is just some dude in a suit with gigantically oversized wings, holding a plastic sword and cracking a strange whip. It really did seem like bad cosplay back in the 1978. It could not save itself from the mediocrity that actually appeared. And it really has become a trope of bad animation and a hallmark for things not to do in films. So, in that, it really is a success. The Lord of the Rings boasted a wonderful cast of actors, including Christopher Guard as Frodo, Dominic Guard as Pippin, Peter Wolfrope as Gollum, Andre Morel as Elrond, William Squire as Gandalf the Grey, Norman Bird as Bilbo Baggins, Fraser Kerr as Saruman the White, Michael Scoilers as Sam, Michael Graham Cox as Boromir, Philip Stone as Theoden, Annette Crosby as Galadriel, Michael Deacon as Wormtongue, John Westbrook as Treebeard, Simon Chandler as Merry, Anthony Daniels, yes, C-3PO, as Legolas, and the late John Hurt as Aragorn. It should also be noted that The Lord of the Rings is a case study in a successful feature film. It really came out of left field. Nobody really wanted to make the film, and a lot of people were sort of perplexed as to how to even get it onto film. Ralf Bakshi, in that sense, is a visionary. He really wanted to keep the original film as intact as possible, and for the most part, he did so. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some of the character designs, as I said before, are lackluster, but they are keeping with, once again, the spirit of Tolkien. And that in itself is something to be admired. I do have to admit, I really do enjoy the 1978 version of the animated Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralf Bakshi. It's one of those guilty pleasures that I have to look back at and just smile. I remember watching it on VHS years ago, and back then it was so dark and muddy, I could barely make out any of the backgrounds, or in fact some of the characters when they were running around on stage, particularly the orcs. Having looked at it again on the DVD, which my brother bought for me years ago, I can see beautiful things about the film. The vistas are wonderfully drawn. The characters, now that I can see them well defined, are actually kind of cute in a way. Mostly the hobbits. And the performances by many of the wonderful actors who were in the film at the time really do shine out in certain parts. Again, I encourage everyone to take a quick look at The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralf Bakshi. It might not be your favorite film of all time, but one can't deny that it really did help inspire other people to continue to make films and perhaps go on to make one of the biggest trilogies ever made. Well guys, that'll about do it for my look back at the 1978 animated feature film, The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralf Bakshi. I wonder if any of you have actually seen the film, and what are your thoughts? And for those of you who haven't, if you're ever able to actually have a look at this animated feature, please leave a comment in the description below and tell me what you thought. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a like. It really helps me out. If you have any comments or suggestions on anime, toys, collectibles, or anything else you'd like me to review, please leave that in the comment section below. And consider subscribing, as I have many more of these episodes on the way. Also, please consider sharing this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. Well guys, as always, thank you very much for watching. Geek proud. Check out some of the other episodes I've done. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter.